What is the cheapest Greek grammar available on the market today, and is it any good? Well, in this video, we're going to take a look at the cheapest Greek grammar on the market that I can find anyway, and we're going to take a look at it and see, is it any good? Is it worthwhile? Hi, I'm Daryl Burling from Master New Testament Greek, and I help people like you with the tools, habits, and system to master the Greek of the New Testament. If you're interested in learning to read the Bible in the original languages, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, hit the notify bell. That way, when new videos are released, you'll get to know about them. And if this video is helpful, hit the thumbs up button as well. That helps YouTube to know that this is helpful, and helps me to know as well. So here's the question, right? We've got a little bit of time on our hands, perhaps. How do we move our Greek forward without breaking the bank? Well, there is one grammar that's on the market today, which is the cheapest Greek grammar available. And I want to address it today, just talk about this Greek grammar and just sort of introduce you to it, tell you what I like about it, what I don't like about it, and make a recommendation to you about whether you should consider getting this grammar or not. The grammar in question is this one. It is Essentials of New Testament Greek by Ray Summers. Now, some of you may be thinking, wait a minute, this isn't even a new grammar. This has been out for years. Well, yes, it has. In fact, this is actually a republication of the revised edition. This was first published back in 1950. It was revised in 1995, and it's just been republished just at the end of last year by Broadman and Holman. So this is now available in this new updated format. Like I mentioned, this is the cheapest Greek grammar available on the market today. Now, if you were to go to the Broadman and Holman website, you'd see that the retail price for this is about $34, which is not particularly cheap for a Greek grammar. A lot of Greek grammars, you'll find them for around the same kind of price. But if you go to christianbook.com, you find it for about $24. And if you go to amazon.com, at least when I looked, which was in the last day or so, this was $16, which makes it, of all the Greek grammars I looked at, this is the cheapest Greek grammar that I'm aware of that's currently in publication. But the question is it any good? Is this worth getting? And if so, for who? Well, let me just take you through a few things of this. First of all, you can see by the size of it that it's actually pretty small. It's 156 pages of actual content. And then from there, there's a number of appendices and indexes and so on at the end of it. So including a vocabulary guide and scripture index, thank goodness, and a number of things like that. So that makes this one of the shortest Greek grammars available. I think it's almost as short as the Campbell and Gibson grammar, so it's very, very short. One of the other things you notice about this, as soon as you open it up and you start flicking through it, is that the chapters in this are very, very short. The longest chapters I think I've found is about 6 pages. The bite-sized nature of this makes it quite consumable. Another thing about this that is really helpful is that it doesn't actually require you to go and buy a workbook. This actually has exercises built into it for every chapter. And that's a good thing. This means that you don't have to, it saves you a little bit of money. So not only is it the cheapest grammar, you don't have to buy anything else to go with it. And the exercises, I might also mention that the exercises also move from a lot of mostly made up exercises. And as you go through, you get more and more from the New Testament until finally you're actually translating whole chunks, mostly from 1 John, toward the end of the grammar as well. So I'm not a huge fan of made up sentences, but I think this strikes a pretty good balance. And one of the reasons it does that is because fairly early on, in fact, the very first chapter of grammar, after you've learnt how the sounds and the punctuation and those kind of things, your first grammar lesson in chapter 3 here is actually the present active indicative verb tense. Now that means that when you do come to do exercises, the exercises are going to be a little more satisfying. Overall then, the exercises in this are okay, pretty good. Like I mentioned, I'm not a huge fan of made up exercises, but I think this strikes a pretty good balance in doing that. From the exercise point of view, this isn't too bad. One of the things I really appreciate about this is the clarity and succinctness of the descriptions. Even though these are very short chapters, you're not shortchanged with the descriptions. The descriptions and explanations of the grammatical points are very clear, very well worded, and I hesitate to say easy to understand. They are easy to understand, but there's a qualifier that I would add to that. And that is that even though these are very good, and honestly, some of the outstanding elements of this grammar are the approach to morphology, and I'll explain that in just a moment a little bit more. But there's also a caveat with that, and that is that overall this grammar tends to focus on function over recognition. Let me give you an example of what I mean by that. for instance, when you're going through and you're learning the cases, you're going to learn the 8-case system, which is an older approach to learning. And the reason it's been put aside today is that it's not as necessary to learn all 8 cases in the way that they teach it in the older systems, as it is to recognize the different forms of the cases, and then the function of the cases can come as a secondary element. So by putting the function of the cases up front and focus on 8 cases rather than 4 or 5 if you include the vocative, that just makes it, I think, a little more complex for learners. Which leads me to another thing with this, and that is that there's probably not as many comparisons in this from an explanation point of view as there is in something like Mounce. Mounce does a really good job in his grammar of explaining the English behind a concept and then introducing you to the Greek. Whereas in this, you're diving in largely into Greek without any real comparisons. And I think that would make this a little more difficult for somebody who is learning Greek for the first time, just using this grammar. In addition to using the 8-case system, there are a number of other elements of this grammar which are a little syntactically dated. It has a really good approach, especially for the day, to what some have called deponent verbs, which we now call middle-only verbs. He calls these defective verbs. And this is a helpful way of approaching it. He talks about deponency, and he says it's probably just that they never really had active forms, and so they're middle. So that's actually pretty good for the age of the book and when it was written and revised even as well. So I don't have any real problems with that. I don't think this has a great approach to verbal aspect. I don't think it does an adequate job of teaching verbal aspect, but honestly, for beginning Greek grammar, that's one of those things that can often be overwhelming for students anyway. And the other thing is the way he addresses moods in this. From a beginning Greek point of view, you'll understand it, but I think long term, you'd want to take an intermediate Greek grammar that would help you better understand the mood probably in a more modern understanding than what this would give you overall. So those are some of the negatives with this. Syntactically, it's a little dative. It focuses on function over form and recognition. And I think the only other thing that I would say there's a bit of a shortcoming with this is that there are no answers for the exercises in this. So I mentioned before, one of the strengths is it has the exercises built in, but there's no answer key. And so from passages that come from the New Testament, you can go look those up in a translation. But if you're looking at the made-up sentences early on, it's pretty hard to look those up and figure out what you're doing. It's not so bad in the first chapter. You can look up and sort of check your work, but it's a little bit more work to do that. You're actually trying to work out, did I get it right, rather than just checking, did I get it right? You're working out, did I get it right? I hope that makes sense. But there are some real positives with this. One, of course, it's the cheapest Greek grammar you can buy today. And so another thing I really like about this, I mentioned before, I like some of its morphological approaches. Let me just expand on that a little bit more. One of the real strengths, I think, of this is the way it breaks up the third declension. The third declension is an area that is often very difficult for beginning Greek students, and this breaks it into 2 chapters and then explains it based on morphology in a way that I think would be very helpful for a beginning Greek student. So I really like the way it approaches the third declension. That is a real strength of this grammar. A couple other things, just to tell a couple of the good things I like about it. First of all, it's got a consistent vocab loading throughout. You're not going to be learning vocabulary through the first 15 to 20 chapters and then go down to nothing like some grammars. In this, you've got the same number of words, roughly speaking, every chapter. So you've got a consistent vocabulary load, which is quite helpful as well. And finally, the order of the approach of the grammatical points in this, I think, is also quite good. It starts off with the present active indicative verb, then goes into your first and second declension nouns. From there, then it kind of moves things around. Like, for instance, you don't get to pronouns until well later on in the book. In fact, after you've done participles. Now, it's not to say you're not going to encounter any pronouns earlier on. You are, but you're just not going to get a discussion of those. But other than that, you kind of have a pretty good flow. By the time you get to about chapter 20 of 31 chapters, you've finished with your indicative verbs. Chapter 31, the last chapter, is infinitives. Me verbs are relegated to a chapter at around chapter 28 or 29, somewhere around there. And so really, I think the way this orders the information is very good as well. So what would I do with this? Would I recommend this grammar to you? So here's what I think this grammar would be perfect for. This grammar would be a perfect complement to something like a Mounce or a Black. Probably more to a Mounce or a Dekker, actually, than even a Black. So the reason for that is that the way he approaches morphology in this is different, which means that when you read it in Mounce's grammar or Dekker's or somebody's like that, you've then got another very short grammar that you can refer to, that you can then get another view of this on. Now that's to say that those other grammars you're going to use for your basics, your comparatives, and understanding how the concepts of the chapter work. But then you can come back to this and then you can say, what does Summers say about how this works? And you've got really nice, clear, succinct explanations in here that discusses the morphology differently and in a way that I think would be a great complement for some of those other grammars. So I think for the price of it, this is a really good grammar to have as a complementary grammar to go with some of those other ones as you're learning. So I think this is worth having on your shelf if you're going through beginning Greek right now, and refer to it regularly, underline it, write in it, highlight it, and let it be a secondary guide to complement the information you have in your current grammar as well. So I'll leave links to this in the description below. So let me ask you this question as we finish here. If you learned using Summers, and I know some of you probably did, then what did you think of it as you went through this? And if you've got another grammar that you like, that you'd like me to have a look at, again, leave a note in the comment section below and let me know. I'd love to take a look at those and perhaps consider doing a review of those grammars also in another video like this too. So I hope this has been helpful. If it has, give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more of this kind of thing, hit the subscribe button and the notify bell to be notified when new videos come out. Finally, let me just mention as I close that I am trying to encourage you through this time, when you have a little extra time on your hands, to use that time to invest in your knowledge of Biblical Greek. I saw a tweet this morning that talked about this is a great time to build up your Biblical Greek. And so I've opened a brand new membership option just for the community of Master New Testament Greek. And the benefit of this is if you're using a grammar other than what I teach, or you're not going through my system, but you want a bunch of other people who are learning Biblical Greek and you can ask questions and I'm in there, and even join some video calls, feel free to join that. You can find out more about that at masterntgreek.com/time. But again, if I can help you at all, let me know in the comment section below. Tell me what grammars you'd like me to review next, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Until then, keep taking small incremental steps on a day-by-day basis to mastery of the Greek New Testament. See you soon.